Hello and welcome to a Loyalty Cup discussion. This week we're talking about a movie that we have some really mixed feelings on, but I think we all enjoyed one way or another. We just thought it'd be a lot more fun to jump into the subject matter, so that's what we're gonna do.
You know, this is the disclaimer. We don't know what he was trying to say with this movie. I don't think anyone really does definitively. So we're absolutely not an authority, but there is a lot to kind of dissect, and so we're gonna give it the old college try.
But before we do any of that, I'm Richie.
I'm Sean.
I'm Andy.
Andy, what's this movie all about?
Over the course of 5 chapters, each referred to as an incident, the house that Jack built follows Matt Dillon as Jack, an architectural engineer by day and a serial killer by night. Through voiceover conversation, we learn that Jack views each of his kills as a work of art, and we see how each incident culminates into his life's work. Each incident we witness humanizes the evil that is depicted through Jack's serial killer persona, and we see the increased risk he subjects himself to as his pride and ego become priority.
This discussion is basically going to move into 3 parts. We're going to start with what's the relationship between the house that Jack built and Lars Von Trier?
Well, I think there's a very obvious connection that many could point towards this movie being autobiographical. A lot of the issues that the main character faces are issues that the director faces in real life. Either accusations of brutality through his filmmaking and his artwork, accusations of misogyny, the way he treats his female characters in his movies, issues of whether or not he's a Nazi sympathizer, that comes up in the film. So I think there's a ton of things that point towards this being autobiographical, even though the director may say otherwise.
Yeah, you really could follow, especially through Jack's stream of consciousness sort of speaking with Virgil. He's trying to justify all these like horrible acts that he's done in a way that makes sense for him. It's hard not to also see that coming out of Lars's mouth, you know? The line that's really interesting, and I've seen a lot of other people quote it, is don't look at the acts, look at the work. You could look at Jack and think that all the things that he's doing are completely terrible, but then he is creating something in his mind that is beautiful, that is art, that is meaningful, and therefore justified. Do we feel the same way about Lars and the movies that he's creating?
Well, yeah, I think the way the movie is structured, how Jack kind of recants all these different incidences that happen, but that leads up to his final work of art, like his kind of body of work, that can be a direct translation to each act, each film of Lars Von Trier, and it creates this whole body of work that he's known for. And I think along the way he's kind of dug a hole for himself, and this movie is him trying to justify it, dig himself out of that hole. Maybe the final house that Jack built is literally just a metaphor for the whole body of work for Lars Von Trier.
Yeah, I could definitely see a narrative where this guy, you know, he's creating these movies and people have just started to basically sum it up as shock factors, especially after Nymphomaniac bombing as much as it did. And so he is kind of trying to put out this, what feels like a diatribe of him like, listen, there needs to be savagery out there in the world, and whether or not you like what it is I'm putting to screen, it needs to be out there, and I'm the guy to do it, right? I'm the tiger in this tiger and lamb situation.
Well, I think an interesting concept that comes up through the film multiple times is Matt Dillon's character Jack tries to define what the difference between an architect and an engineer is, but I think they also touch on issues of art versus artist, and whether or not the final piece of art somehow represents the artist that created it, or what that tie is. Because once you make a piece of art or a film or a house made of dead bodies, once it's out there in the world, people can prescribe their own meaning to it, and it may not be what you intended.
The connection I make there too is they talk about letting the materials do the work, right? Letting the materials push kind of where the direction of the building is going to go. And I think about how he talks about the architect versus engineer. The engineer kind of figures out how to build the building, but then the architect goes and does the work. And how he has this sort of obsession throughout the movie with Glenn Gould. And Glenn Gould wasn't playing his own music. He was really famous for playing Bach's music, but he was the player. I'm wondering if Lars has this same sort of relationship with the movie, right? I didn't invent the evil of the world. I didn't invent the savagery in the world, just the disgusting, dark things that exist, but I play those things. You know, I'm the one to present it to you.
I think so, and I think the fact that he makes at least 3 failed houses off of plans he engineered, and then finally the house he makes is the one he's been collecting bodies for his whole life, I think that points to the fact that maybe Lars feels the same way. He may be really good at presenting these ideas, putting them together, but people continually critique his films negatively. And so maybe this is him pointing towards, yeah, maybe the films aren't as polished as audiences may want. This is my vision, and I engineered it.
And you know, like that final point is interesting because I might agree with all these people that have critiques of Lars Von Trier movie. This might be, we're talking about how sloppy this piece of art is, but it doesn't make it something really worth watching.
Right, so my criticism also stems from, okay, yeah, you're using violence, as Jack is in the film, to create your art, but the art isn't that good. I mean, what does Jack do in the film using his tools and his paints, you know, his lumber, which is what, the human body? His kills weren't, there was no artistry in what he
there
was
was no
doing.
intricacy or elegance to
Well,
the way he was going about it.
So I think there's a weird disconnect that that the movie called each kill his piece of art, but in fact I don't think the kills were the art, it was what he was doing afterwards. So when he was making the contorted bodies, putting them together in different poses, making the photographs, and then leaving those as the scene after he scribbled Mr. Sophistication, I literally think that those Polaroids were supposed to be his art.
And I think a different aspect of it is, and this is really interesting because we're coming at it different ways, I actually think that his ability to pull the wool over people's eyes, the ability to just rapidly act like a serial killer and run around and do sloppy work, I think the finessing of that situation is also his artistry. Let's dive into what I've named evil and its pursuit towards power. We're watching a monster abuse power. And it's pretty obvious, actually. It becomes kind of ham-fisted. It hammers you over the head with it. Particularly when you get to the part where they all throw on some red hats. What are we supposed to take away from this?
So this is actually what I thought was the obvious metaphor for the entire film, because we saw the director's cut, and at the beginning you have the director going on about something and then says, and remember, not another Trump. Something along those lines.
I think he says, never another Trump.
Never another Trump. And the audience goes, ha 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 ha. And then you're wondering...
They clapped at our
People
screening.
clapped at
Yeah.
us.
I thought it was going to have nothing to do with the movie.
Me too. But then as I was watching it, it did kind of color my perception of the themes.
You were primed to look out for certain things.
Yeah,
Right.
and I wonder what it would have been like if I hadn't seen that. I kind of wish he hadn't dropped that.
I think at this... but there are other things that tie into what he says.
What you start to see in this movie is you start to see somebody who basically deceives what we see as the common man, what we see as people who don't know any better or are easily fooled or easily persuaded. And then he starts to be brazen with that power.
Right, so you see him going to the door of a woman who I think is the lady from Men in Black, the Edgar scene.
Is it really?
Asking for sugar water. So she answers the door and he gives her some absurd lie, and she doesn't believe it. But she's willing to hear more.
Yeah.
She's willing to listen to more lies until he gets to the one. So he is unstoppable.
And it's not until he offers her something he can't really give her that she's like, oh yeah, come on in.
Then as soon as he offers her more money, he's in the door and immediately chokes and stabs and kills her. So that could be just a metaphor of a politician, right? Just telling you what he needs you to hear in order,
nothing.
right, to get himself in the door. And then once he's in, it doesn't matter.
And the way that I think it connects to the current administration, you have him asking the law enforcement, like, yeah, go ahead, dig around. I want you to search.
Insist.
Yeah, I insist that you look as closely into this as you can, without any shame, thinking and feeling like he's going to pull this off. And so these connections that at least I really started making and started cementing themselves, while I think they're there and they're very obvious, I still don't know if it would have gone a little differently if I hadn't heard that message from Lars at the beginning of the movie.
Again, going into the comparisons with the current president, just abusing women, you know, putting his hands on her.
Calling her simple.
They're really just pawns for his game to play with. And then what's interesting too was how in that same scene with Simple, he really starts playing the victim. He goes into this like soliloquy about how, like, why is it always the man's fault? And it really felt like, and before we go any further, there's also interviews where Lars goes, I was inspired to make this movie after the Trump administration came to power. But in that moment, it sounded like Trump kind of crying about the media, you know, and talking about how the media is always after him and they're always trying to find the worst story for him, which, you know, whether or not you agree with that, that's things that we've heard our current administration do.
Well, and the messed up thing is he's asking Simple to choose a knife that presumably he's going to kill her with. Well, he's saying men are born guilty. Why are men guilty from birth, you know?
Yeah.
And he's going on this diatribe while he's literally tying up a woman he just, you know, berated verbally.
I'll let you choose the knife that I'm going to kill you with, you know, giving you an awful choice. You know, it can go back to an election. You get the choice between
Lesser of three evils.
however many, right? So choose this one. They're all going to be bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I'll let you feel like you're doing something and
see.
also rub it in the fact that you are powerless.
It kind of point out that it's like, yeah, this is what you did to yourself. Like
You bought these knives.
Yeah, exactly. You bought these knives. You chose the one you liked.
Yeah. And then going into the scream as much as you want, no one's going to do anything, I think was a blatant reference just to American society as a whole, which is no one is going to help each other. You know, you hear a scream and it's more of a nuisance than anything else. You're trying to go on with your life. So it's kind of like a trite message. You know, it's cliche just to be like, yeah, but to see it and be that close and be shown it in such a visceral way, that hopelessness of not having anyone to help you once you're locked in with that man.
So she literally told the authorities what was going on, and it still happened.
Well, he accused her of being drunk. You know, so that goes again, we hear that blaming the victim. Also, the cop is down there when she's screaming. And again, the police don't hear and the police do not investigate.
The other one that hit really hard whenever I heard it was because of how it was phrased. Virgil, towards the end, when Jack gets into that second part of his freezer that he couldn't open before, Virgil at one point asks him flat out, hey, weren't you supposed to build something? You know, the relation of the wall is just so distinct, but then you see him build what it is he wanted to build with the bodies of the victims that he left behind. I feel like that one really made the point. It really made the connection for me, and at that point I'm like, okay, Lars, I get it.
Right.
He doesn't necessarily have anything new to say about it outside of like, this evil just exists and there's not a lot that we can do about it. At least that's how I came out of it.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. We did have a discussion about something similar that I'd like to bring up, which is all of the folks in this movie are depicted as being very slow and very stupid and very open to being killed. And I think it's easy for people to watch a film like this or just films in general, or see people in real life in general and be like, well, I'm not that stupid. I would never let that happen. Mm-hmm. But then you break it down and be like, well, am I maybe in a way that I'm not picking up on? And is this happening right now? Because you would say, oh, like further generations are always going to say, oh, well, we could never elect Trump. You know, that with these people was so stupid. This could never happen again. But the thing is, it did happen, and it can happen very quickly, where if you are not vigilant
and engaged, you know,
active, in then something like this can actually happen. You can have someone in your house and be wondering, how was I so stupid to let this person in?
All right, before we move on any further, I'd like for you guys to clack that subscribe button. Don't even hesitate, just do it. Flick of the wrist, the video won't stop.
Is that true?
I don't know. Can you guys just test the subscribe button first?
Leave us some feedback in the notes.
Stick around towards the end because we'll announce what movie we're going to dive into next week. And I'm very excited about it.
Me too.
I can't wait to hear what we're doing next week.
All right, so let's dive into the Inferno. It's not even a metaphor. It's quite literally just a film representation.
So the epilogue of this movie turns into a whole third act that is separate than anything else we've seen before.
Which I actually enjoyed. At the time, I was expecting all these very like run-of-the-mill sort of conclusion where they either arrest him or he gets away or something, but it circumvents all of that. Let's talk that out real quick. Is he dead at that point? Does he kill himself?
I think there's two options here. Either the cop didn't miss and actually killed him, and he just thought he missed as the whole process was happening, or he used that one single last bullet to kill himself. And
so that way that plays out, at least from our conversation, is like, okay, he opens up that second door that he's never been able to open up before, and it's because he's dead. And that hole in the ground beneath the house that he's built is indicative or representative of the one between his eyes, provided he shot himself in the face. Now that's just us extrapolating, but that introduces us into finally touring hell. So they come down in those bubbles. What I loved in there was how you have this really poetic and beautiful representation of them kind of coming down in these bubbles, which I actually thought looked super cheesy in the moment, but worked for me once it cut to what was actually happening, which was just looked like a handheld camera with a very unprofessional just light blaring against a couple of people spelunking and just water swishing around everywhere. It was a cool little juxtaposition. But yeah, they crawl into hell.
And then this is where Lars Von Trier introduces a lot of his kind of camera tropes of slow motion action or variable speed. And I think that really creates a weird third act that seems like a separate movie entirely.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually very similar to how Melancholia starts off. It's like this own little mini film at the beginning of the movie with all that slow motion, and then the movie starts. That's kind of what it felt reminiscent of, almost like the reverse of that.
Well, in Antichrist, a lot of the nature scenes, they use that. And I think that that's a direct translation over to this third part of just nature, except you're in hell.
Favorite sequence probably in the whole movie, just because of how utterly beautiful it is the film representation of
The Baroque of Dante.
Yeah, so it's a painting of Dante's Inferno, but it's just the slow motion, how sharp everything is, the colors, the way that
they're like rafting on bodies, carrying them across.
And it's so long, and it really sets you up for this new sort of dreamy, ethereal sequence that's going to start. There's really no substance to it, really.
Yeah.
Like it ends up being really beautiful.
It's just a cool visual representation of hell based on Dante's Inferno until we get to the bridge. It all just gets you to this ending scene, which even in of itself was kind of a letdown.
I honestly think the whole point of that end scene was Lars Von Trier attributing that there's beauty to darkness. And earlier in the film, when he's making photographs, they're looking at negatives, they're looking at the density of highlights, which on a negative it looks black, but when you print it, it looks white. It's a light bulb, for instance. And then the end of the film, that's how they end it. They show the burning fire that Jack falls into, and it goes negative, and so that burning bright fire becomes the darkness.
And it ties in further to that William Blake poem, because Jack, the character, really found a lot of beauty in the tiger and the ferociousness of the tiger, and he did love the negatives. And when we're watching, despite it feeling like there's not a lot of substance to it, in and of itself, yeah, it could just be showing us that, listen, this is hell, but it's still something to behold. It's still something that is so beautiful, so eye-catching, so beguiling. But I do want to talk about that final bridge sequence, because I do think, for me, it wasn't necessarily a letdown. I did like this idea that despite all he had done, he still thought he could climb his way out of this. He still thought he could come out on top.
Yeah, it's just kind of another display of his hubris, thinking, I haven't been caught before, I'm not going to get caught by this depth of hell. Let's see how this goes, Thanks, Verge. I'm going to go for it. Even when there's a point where he's not going to make it across, he doesn't try and go back. Kind of an all or nothing situation, even when it's obvious that there's nothing. It's not to say that when he falls down there, he's reaching death. It's already been proven that there's an afterlife for him, and there is depths. And even Verge tells him, I know you want to see everything, and you want to know everything. So I've taken you as far as it goes, but the depths go even further. This is as far as I could take you. So he wants to see if he can take it even further. But you know how it is. It's always, when you see someone trying to get somewhere, and then they fall, and then it's the end of the movie, you're just like, okay.
See, I think I enjoyed that part of it. Not necessarily because it's like I was rooting against him, but because it did leave me with some stir, it stirred something up in here that just felt like the world is a messed up place.
I think for those that do view this movie as autobiographical, that end scene is kind of an unapologetic look at Von Trier saying, this is what I do, I'm going to keep doing it, I find beauty in it.
But one of my points against this film is there's all this talk about how extreme and pushing the envelope and really taking it to, the limits. You don't see that in this film, and I don't think you see it in any of his films. It's like, hey, you show a kid getting shot. Maybe that used to be super shocking, and maybe certain people still are horrified by that. And obviously, a child getting shot. To see it in a film and everyone just kind of keep harping on the intense, insane violence of this film, you're going to be let down, I think. I don't think it goes far enough for this message.
Well, I agree. I also think it's part of this movie is almost Lars fighting against the hype machine that's built around his movies, because while he finds them as dark and disturbing, and they are, I don't know if he's saying they're the most dark and disturbing thing there is. I think people in the media and people going to review these movies are talking about it in that way.
That's fair.
And so I think we come away with this expectations. We're like, well, you could totally amp this up like 10 more.
Yeah, and that's
but he's just
fair.
making his art,
Right, and his art is beautiful. But I think in that case, focus on your art being beautiful. The theme of this movie was not necessarily beauty. It was finding beauty in horrible things. So I guess that goes against what I was literally just saying.
Yeah, I think he just stopped your own foot. There's definitely a lot you can dive into, and we kind of just talked about it off camera, but what it really feels like is you're you're jumping from like lily pad to lily pad, and you can really dive in deep at what each lily pad has to offer. But as a whole, this movie really like kind of a muddled mess?
Obviously, you could say that it's about Jack and his obsession with art and death and evil and creation. But I think it goes a lot further than that, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly in which direction it goes down.
This movie feels very wide, but not very deep, is what it is.
Yeah, there's a lot of little holes everywhere that you can go see what's in them, but they don't really lead anywhere.
But that doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy the hell out of watching this movie. It was still really beautiful. If all I'm watching is Lars's stream of consciousness, then he presents it in an incredible way.
Yeah, I enjoyed the film as a whole. I don't enjoy talking about it because there are so many different interpretations of what you're seeing, and none of them really tie together into a cohesive whole for me. But I do think that's one of the great things about it, is that I think anyone can find some type of meaning to this film.
You know, at the end of the day, it's still a serial killer movie. Like, I can have friends that go to this and don't care at all about what it's trying to say, and just want to see Jack start killing people, and maybe they'll just tune out at the epilogue.
Well, something interesting to acknowledge is the structure of this movie isn't a standard film. It's not just A to B, and it's all video of actors acting things out. You have a main storyline, 5 acts, 1 epilogue of Matt Dillon playing a serial killer, but that's punctuated by these voiceovers of Jack speaking to some character that you're not introduced to until the end of the film.
I think you were talking about it earlier. He calls this type of filmmaking something.
Digressionism.
Digressionism, right? And I think Lars, that's the only kind of movie he can make at this point. But I'm okay with it, you know? Like, I'm going in expecting a Lars Von Trier movie.
Well, when we came out of the theater, Richie hit it on the nose. He said it basically is like, if you go get drunk with Lars Von Trier at a bar, this is what he would do for 2 hours. It's just like talk about art and history and digging himself out of a hole, talking about the criticisms that have been put on him, the burden of his films, and him as an artist and a filmmaker.
And of course, politics would be thrown in there.
Yeah, politics.
Because he drink a little bit too much. I'm super eager to hear what you guys have to say. Because, yeah, it's like you said, we're not going to have everything spot on, and there's going to be things that we miss. And we're really just kind of espousing our opinions, and we don't agree about everything on this. So I'd love to hear what you have to say. Some of your theories in the comments. Next week, we're going to be talking about Under the Silver Lake. I'm very excited about it. Trailer of the year. So if you enjoyed watching this, if you like what we're doing, if you love movies the way that we do, please clack that subscribe button. And until next time, I wish you and yours the very best.